Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting in a moment, just waiting for everyone to join in and maybe some last minute stragglers. Ideally, this is for questions pertaining to today's topic, and we hopefully will, if it's not something we cover during the actual discussion, we'll cover at the end. All right, we've about almost 20 people on. We like these kind of tight-knit groups. So I think we're ready to go. We got our team here from this side, obviously my partner in the consultants corners, Ilya Imansky and
Hello,
Bill
everybody.
Hayes. And Bill Hayes, the regional security director for the Bronx and Westchester, behind the scenes, making sure we're rocking and rolling. So before we jump in, I see some new names. So welcome to Consultants Corner. To reiterate, these sessions, for the most part, except for what we call a takeover, these sessions are to discuss the, the post-grant process, meaning you were already awarded a grant and you're navigating all the rules. Who knew how much it could be and how crazy it could be, right? It was hard enough to apply, but now we're trying to do it right, follow the rules, make sure we get reimbursed by the state agencies, which is confusing enough just to navigate that. And most importantly, install a good security program, hardware, etc. And that's really where we've left these chats. We've been around a couple of years now, right? We've talked about everything from EHP to the advertising. So please always see our library, our Consultants Corner archive, and where you can learn through and hear about how we've discussed these topics. Today's topic, the request for proposal. This is an area that's left very gray for everyone to do, right? We know what dishes and even DCJS, right? If you're not familiar with the acronyms, DHSES, Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, they administer the federal nonprofit security grant program. And the New York State DCJS, Division of Criminal Justice Services, they administer the New York State hate crimes grant. A lot of similarities because you're technically still contracting with the state, but there are some nuances. That stuff we discussed in another session. We're not going to be splitting those hairs today. Either of the grants, once you advertise or once you start moving forward with finding vendors, you want to develop a request for proposal. However, neither agency has clarified what's required or what should be in an RFP. And by the way, RFPs are not just when you have a grant. For any program, security or not, where you're bringing in outside vendors, it's good practice. Nonetheless, this is an area where Ilya, myself, the RSDs are always working to assist everybody and helping them develop their RFPs. What's that balance? What's the appropriate process? What is it? And that's what we want to dive in today. Ilya, anything else before we jump in?
No, I think we have sufficient amount of information to share with you today. Thank you for continuing to patronize this humble forum. And for those who are joining us anew, welcome. Hopefully this will be of good use to you.
Before we formally jump in, our standard disclaimer, right? I'm sure at this point everyone's familiar. The Community Security Initiative, right? A joint partnership between the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York and UJA Federation. We don't speak for any of the government agencies that administer these grants. We just have a lot of familiarity, both from the inside, from being consultants for this work as CSI, and we hear a lot of things and we work with the state agencies to get the best answers. That's how we develop our information. Any of you who have done direct calls with us, and even on this forum, you get a specific question, ask your rep. It's always best to confirm with the rep you have from your agency to just confirm your questions so you get the best answer. We cannot speak for them, but it's our best guidance. And the fact is, things even change. So we always have to be mindful of that. So today's topic, and Ilya and I are going to kind of work together on this one, a little bit more participatory. If there's comments from the group, please just put your hand up or something. We try to keep it a little more interactive. It's not a huge webinar, so we can do that. But the real question is, and I'll pose this to Ilya. Ilya, what is a request for proposal?
It's a question that I have heard quite a few of my clients ask even after having gone through the process multiple times. And this is something that I think it's a very good, very brief segue. We completely respect, and I continue to say this, we completely respect that all of you are wearing multiple hats. And so some of this technical terminology, which request for proposal term is, we can't expect that this is part of your day-to-day operation language, even when you're in the office. We'll continue to record these. And again, this is the reason why we actually have a library of these, is to help you get back to this information. So please just remember that whenever you have some questions, there probably is quite enough content in our library that you can go back to. Request for proposal is a formal solicitation of proposals from contractors for different services. In relation to the projects related to grant awards, this primarily will be spread across different services that are allowable by the grant. For most of you, it'll be video surveillance, intrusion detection systems, security officers, training, and various other covered systems and services. So a request for proposal is an organization's outreach. It's a formal outreach. It's a set of documents with which you share with the prospective bidders to inform them of the scope of the project or several projects if you're running them concurrent.
And I'll add this. Can anyone guess the acronym we're going to be using probably throughout this session, and you'll hear many times? RFP. Probably heard it out there before. We've done enough of these webinars where we say RFP, and then last minute of the show, someone goes, "What's an RFP?" Okay, RFP, request for proposal. That's what we're going to say. Those acronyms are important. Before we jump on, and Ilya discussed a little bit of what it should include, and obviously that's what we'll discuss today. But a major challenge that Ilya and I have been navigating, honestly, even before CSI, right, is there's a lot of materials out there from the technical sides, what you want to provide your vendor, the bidders. What is that balance? What's the appropriate amount? Because like Ilya said, we're all wearing so many hats, and now we need to be security specialists and create this formal RFP when I don't know what it should be and what should it include. So besides the fact that we're going to explain how you have a lot of this information already, Ilya and I have been back and forth literally for years on what is the best way CSI can support you without drowning you further. How can we help you take those steps forward to develop a sufficient RFP, but something that you can move your project forward by letting your vendors know what you want, and you having a good baseline in project scope almost of what you're going to do. So we have some materials that we've been developing, some of it you've seen, and we have it available for after the session. Always reach out to your regional security director and they'll point you in the right direction. But while we get there, let's talk about it through this session today. So the goals. I think for any security project you do in the world, not even just the RFP, and I hope you didn't forget yet what RFP stands for, but not even just for your RFP. Any security project, focus on what are your goals. And whether you're putting up a camera system or hardened doors, the point isn't just for hardened doors or just a camera. It's to accomplish something. It's to achieve something. And by starting to put this down on a document amongst your committee, your team members who are leading this project, is critical to understand what you want to install. If you want to monitor entry points with let's say a camera system, something we can all comprehend. Again, only one piece of a comprehensive security program, but for example purposes, if we want to monitor entry points, and we have bids that have cameras throughout every hallway in every office, it's overkill, and it's not what you need, right? So when you start putting it down with your committee, you start listing what exactly is it. In a bullet form, I always would advise as a starting point. What are we trying to do with this project? Ilya, anything on that? I want to go through each bullet with you.
Imagine going to a car dealer and the first thing they ask you, well, what kind of car do you want? I mean, you already came to a branded car dealerships, and they're like, well, what kind of car do you want? And you will have, I'm sure, your own set of requirements. Okay, think of what it is that you have to write down for your RFP is your own set of requirements. They can be initially quite basic, but they require agreement, right? Whatever you will communicate to the dealer about the leather seats, they have to be black. I need, I don't know, so four-wheel drive, and I need the automatic hatchback, right? Fine, you've just named several requirements. And so the features of different products and services that you're expecting is what the contractors need to understand. So think about it from that perspective, not just to say, I want a camera. It's the same as saying, I want a car. You see what I mean? So, like, if you just simply say, I want the camera, you're going to get the cheapest of the cheap with the highest profit margin. Okay? And that camera likely will have been banned by the US government because you did not stipulate a requirement of that sort. And we'll get to the requirements. We actually have a separate page on that. But that's too superficial of a request. You have to ask for a camera with certain sets of features, right? We're not, like I said, we're not expecting for you to know all, each of those features directly or to have done your homework, whatever. But through the webinars that we've been presenting, we've guided you. We have a separate webinar, probably or two or three, that talk about video surveillance and what features are typically expected. Simply have a look, engage with your regional security director, and you'll be much better served. And we will share with you in this particular webinar some of the most basic features that you should be requesting for certain types of equipment. Okay, that list is coming up in a couple of slides.
Perfect. Perfectly said. You know, we might know for the car example some basic concepts of what we want to do, but how many of us can get into the actual engine design and talking camshafts and all, et cetera, right? That's beyond that. We're not talking spec, but what are those general requirements? And not even just that. And this is what we'll talk about a little bit in the next coming slides. Not just the camera placement and design of the system. There's back end stuff. There's the computer and the head end and the wiring, which your vendor's responsible for, and you want a complete project from them. So the next point is you have much of what you need already. A lot of people get spun up here, especially with these grants. You have a lot of what you need already, right? Besides the fact that you know your budget because it's based on your grant allocation. But if you have an EHP, you already have pictures and placement approved by FEMA, right? You have your assessment, which likely includes some information. So we're going to talk through that. But you have a lot of what you need already, and now it's just about collating it into a clean, small, simple pack. And Ilya will talk about that, I think, on the next slide.
I was going to bring up just one point. Is I had an executive director of a fairly large Jewish community center. When I mentioned to her that, hey, actually, you have the EHP and this should be part of your request for proposal set of documents, she's like, something that I created meets the standard of the RFP. She was like super proud of it. I'm like, yeah, this is, you've already done a lot of homework. You have something they can turn over to the vendors. So back to you, Bill.
Exactly. And you know what? A lot of what we are gleaning and sharing with you is just having done this literally between us and the RSDs, which now, cover the whole New York City and beyond. We're talking to hundreds of locations and hundreds of examples, and we've seen it all. So please don't feel that as much as every one of you is unique, that these are issues that we've seen and we can help you navigate. And your RSDs and us are a resource to you even beyond these webinars, but we wanted to have this package for you. We mentioned under the first bullet that beyond just the system design, where cameras are placed in our example, it's sometimes it's the baseline requirements that are most important. What are you expecting from your vendor? How should that quote actually look? Deadlines, right? Important piece. Materials they're providing. What's the agreement of when the project's done? Baseline things that should be lined up when you get started. Everyone gets drowned in specs. But at the end of the day, the vendor's going to come and they're authorized dealers for certain products. So they're going to, they have their specs lined up. We have to make sure they actually share those specs with you. And that's a separate issue we'll get to. And don't go for perfect. I think that leads right into what I was saying. There are obviously, if you had a huge organization and a $1 billion project budget, you need to cross all your T's and dot all your I's and really line it up. And that's something we've done, Ilya and I have done outside of this world. But like we said, we're developing and we want to coach you for a manageable RFP that hits your goals and is realistic. So we've advised in the past what those are so you can see it and peel back what works for you. And in past sessions, if you find previous webinars, you'll see that. But now we're trying to, what is that full right package for you without tripping you up and without making it too burdensome that you don't take the next step. So don't go for perfect. And the last bullet, and I'm going to turn back to Ilya, you want a comprehensive quote. I'll give one example. And as we talk through the next few slides, you'll see what they should include. If you get an invoice or a quote, that just lists a bulk price, that's a failure to me. Would you go to a restaurant with your family and they just said, oh, here's your bill, $100, without, well, what did we order? What is each thing, right? Or send your kid to the mall and they come back, oh, I spent $250. Well, what did you spend it on, right? Same thing here. I don't know if, personally, if I get a quote like that, I'm insulted. I think that is just not professional. It really should be line by line itemized, 12 cameras, this much per camera. NVR or DVR, this much. Labor costs, this much per hour, and this is how many hours we expect, etc. And a few other items which we'll get into. But you want that's really what your goal is from putting out your RFP, is to provide this quote that allows you to make an educated decision, not to have to do more homework and go back and forth forever. To a degree, that will happen. That's natural with the vendors. But you want it mostly set up so now you have these bids in that are required by the grant. And you want to be able to actually make educated decisions with your committee, not being security professionals.
I like the last statement here. Don't assume anything, and don't let the vendors assume anything. So vendors love making assumptions because those assumptions put money in their pocket. Okay. Oh yeah, but I didn't know you didn't need conduit, so I priced in conduit and you paid for it. And you're like, wait a second, how did that happen? Okay. Or I didn't know you didn't want like the super duper most expensive camera in the world, so I priced that in for you. So that's why you have, instead of 15 cameras that you could get for a fair price, you're getting 3. Okay, just because they're like super expensive, complete overkill for the purpose, right? So the fewer assumptions you make yourselves, just to what Dov was saying, and the fewer assumptions you let vendors make, balances out, and it makes your proposal, the proposals you receive, and then the project that you end up implementing a lot more realistic and more useful to you in the long run. So I suppose that's all I can add here.
And I'll say on the flip side, when it's starting to get installed, they'll find new hiccups and issues. And if it wasn't designed on the front end that they need to provide a whole turnkey type project, that's just going to come back to you as an extra charge.
I was actually instructing one of my clients, also a synagogue in Brooklyn, to include a statement in their contract with the vendor once they were ready to award, that no changes will be tolerated, and this project is a turnkey project, meaning the vendor is responsible for making the systems work to the client's liking without asking for any additional money, unless it's initiated by the client. Okay, and the client did initiate, but it was their choice. Okay, they said, I want some additional equipment here because it's going to be useful to me. And so they went out and asked the vendor to add that to their project. But without that request, the vendor owns the system. And so again, minimizing assumptions helps save you quite a bit of money. Please don't be scared. We're not trying to like make these things so small text that you can't read them. We're not expecting you to read them. Okay, just look at the blue boxes for now. That's all we're asking you, because guess what? We've shared this information before. So we're just going to guide you to help you understand that some of the typical information that one would include in the request for proposal are a decent cover letter that introduces the project. Okay, we are this and this organization. Hello, we're soliciting your proposal for and then you list what specific scopes of work that you're hoping to accomplish and asking this vendor to bid on. Then, together with the cover letter, it's always great to include your EHP, which actually lists specific locations of devices. And then something that we'll show you in a slightly enlarged form in a couple of slides is instructions to bidders, so that, again, they don't assume anything and that you give them as much guidance as possible so they can understand that they can't cut corners, right? So guess what? Document 1 on the left, document 2 in the middle, and document 3, instructions to bidders, on the right. And then if you have any additional formal documents that you need to be filled out that are specific to your organization, anything else that helps vendors understand very specifically what you're asking them to do, please, this is the time to include that in your RFP package. The EHP typically not only has the little icons and kind of placement of devices, but it can also include a little bit of text to say, hey, for this particular location, we're expecting devices to have these features, okay, something of that sort, right? But we'll get to additional information on the next few slides. Dov?
Just to clarify, so the EHP, the Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation documents, that's only required for the federal grant. So if you have that, it's just a great extra asset to put in your package, right? Obviously, the state hate crimes grant don't require it, but hey, pictures of your building before the walkthrough of the vendor with you saying, hey, we want cameras in this area. It doesn't have to be as formal as an EHP, but can be created instead, and really just not a hard thing. It's really just you putting your thoughts on paper in a visual way so they know what they're coming in for, and don't just, like Ilya said before, steer the conversation. Many of them are obviously have some engineers and have the experience to design it right, but it should be with your needs and your requests and requirements in perspective.
And another thing that EHP helps, and again, we're using EHP, but you can replace it with a term, for example, visual placement of devices. You don't have to call it an EHP if it's not a federal grant, right? It's still probably the most useful tool for vendors, because how do they quantify the pricing for their proposals? They need to know the quantity of devices. If they don't see where you want devices, they can't count. Okay, so you say, I want video surveillance cameras around my building, or I want locks and door closers. They're going to say, how many? Because otherwise, if they don't have that information, they cannot give you a price. Right. So the more descriptive you are about specific locations and how many devices, the specific type you're looking for, the better off you'll be when discussing this with vendors during their walkthroughs, if you can do that. And it's going to be easier for them to not make mistakes. And once they produce their proposals to you, it is more likely that all proposals will be relatively similar in terms of the numbers of devices and the types of devices and so on, so that you can at least compare not apples to oranges or apples to pineapples, but you can compare something that looks and feels relatively the same.
And I'll add that it's kind of almost your own homework. So yeah, it's on paper. It might not be perfect yet. And when they do the walkthrough and say, well, we can't actually drill through there, it has to be there. But at least you decide with your committee a little bit of what you want, so you know what you're explaining when they come through. So it's almost your own homework before you're saying, well, I don't know, we have money for it, what should we do, right? You should be thinking behind the scenes with your team, with your RSD's assistants, your regional security director from CSI, with their assistance and consultation to really do it right. I'm going to interject real quickly, Ilya. There's a great question on the chat. Do you include your budget for the project overall with your RFP? It's a great question, and there's no perfect answer. I'll tell you personally from the grant administrative process, and I love Ilya's input as well. I think it's beneficial to provide your budget. Why? A, even if someone's going to overbid you, right, and try to max out that budget even though it's not there, they're competing against the other bids. So right there, you have that way to level the playing field. You don't have to accept them. And you see, wait, the other ones are 30 grand, two bids at 30 grand, another one at 50. Something's off here, right? So immediately a light will go off. And B, you can't spend more than your budget amount. So if you go out and just don't put your quote in the limit, and you start going back and forth with vendors to work it out into your budget, you're just added months of work to your project. So to save yourself some extra stress and agita, I think putting it in this situation, it might not apply to all security projects and all projects in general, but for your grant, because you definitely are limited short of modifications to your budget. We're not getting into that, but you're limited to your budget allocation. And if a vendor comes back because we want to do 10 doors and we had 30 grand for it, and they say, well, that's actually a 200 grand project. Instead, they say, hey, listen, 50 grand, we can do this many doors at these specs. And let's go to there. And you can now compare that with similar specs to this. Well, this company can do 4 doors and this one can do 3. Those are those apples to apples Ilya's talking about. But if you just say, we want all this, tell us what your quote is, you're going to get quotes all over the place. And you're going to have to work with them continuously to bring it back to where you need it. So I personally believe you should, for these projects, put your budget out there.
I can only agree. There is still room to call these requests for proposals and the bids that you will receive competitive, but they should be competitive based on the best fit for purpose rather than for the finite budget that you have. And please remember that let's say your total budget for a specific piece of the security improvements, let's say again, access control, for example. Let's say you have $50,000 for it, and the bidder comes in and says, I'll give it to you for 30, and everything seems to match. You still have to spend that 20, or you got to do something with it, so you got to maximize the awarded sum of money. And so that could also help you understand, maybe we earmarked too much. Not that it happens typically, but maybe we earmarked too much. I got to talk to my grant rep. Maybe I got to move it to something else that I didn't think I could cover, So there's always a room to first state the budget that you have available, learn from the bids that are coming through, and then still interrogate the information that comes your way in such a way so that you can award to the best contractor. What I typically see works is picking contractors that actually are good at responding to you. They're treating you very well. They're punctual. So there are a lot of qualitative metrics, in my view, that overcome the best price that they can offer. Okay, I've seen contractors that bid somewhere in the middle of the budget or in the middle of the price range perform and do the best quality work above and beyond other contractors that might have offered a lower price.
I'll also add, I've seen many vendors who are frankly very honest, and they'll say, listen, I know you have 20 grand for this, it's only gonna be 13,000. So there's a couple elements to this. All
and
right.
One other thing, Dov, I think that that was your addition here. Forgive me that I didn't mention it. Please remember that the specs from your assessment, that's the blue box at the bottom of the slide, specs from your assessment, if you've ever received an assessment from the CSI team, right? Very likely it contains a lot of very useful, very important technical information about the majority of the electronic security systems that you need. And on top of that, it also includes some specifications for the types of training you should be considering. It includes more information and specs about the security officer staff that you might be hiring, and various other security improvements that are covered by the grant.
So we're going to go a little bit deeper through these instructions to bidders. Just to explain real quickly, like I said when we started, Ilya and I have been, and the team have been back and forth, and what is the right amount of volume and content? Because everyone comes to us, even on the chat bar here and emails while we're going, can I have this? Can I have that? And sometimes a lot of information we had, like very built out and elaborate RFPs, were A, very heavy for you and your team, but B, for a small project, hey, we have 10 grand for something, and you send that to your vendor, and be like, I'm not dealing with this, a 50-page RFP. So, I mean, mostly Ilya, we can't take the credit. combined a lot of the high level critical points into this document. This is a CSI slash Ilya created document, maybe the other way around. Ilya slash CSI created document for CSI organizations, clients, with some of the high level stuff that should go. You have the cover letter that we've talked about in previous sessions as well as today, and I put a link in our chat. You can always get from your RSD, right? You have pictures that we talked about from your EHP, and now this one-pager document. There's some tweaks you have to read through it. You see it needs some editing and adjustment per location, but it's one document with that high level stuff, which basically pulls back that big instruction that Ilya said before: don't assume anything. So I'm going to let Ilya talk through this a little bit, and we're going to dive into a couple specific areas of it.
Once again, I will ask for you to take a deep breath. We're not trying to make you remember all of these statements. Okay? So consider this a point of meditation. Okay? We want you to just feel comfortable that any bullet on this list can be given to any contractor that installs electronic security systems. Okay? And even those that install door hardware. They might say, oh, majority of the electronic stuff doesn't apply to me. Great. But please read the top few bullets, because guess what? The top few bullets are applicable to any contractor. Okay? Proposals shall include line item pricing, brand names, model numbers, labor units, rates, and so on and so forth. Any contractor that delivers any sort of trinket, right, that sells you units of goods, should be able to provide you proposals that include those items, right? All work shall be done by properly licensed personnel with documentation as an authorized dealer for proposed systems. I've seen it many, many times when the work quality, when I arrive on site, or let's say an engineer arrives on site to inspect it, is so poor that you kind of have to scratch your head, like, what is this? How do we fix this? This needs to be completely removed. And probably a few things in my building got broken because of this work. And now we're stuck with with fixing things, right? A lot of the work in New York City area by some contractors, I'm not going to say all, but some, is done by people who don't have any business touching a hammer or any other tool for that matter. Okay? Because they don't know what they're doing. And so you want to make sure that whoever installs your systems and hardware are people with proper licenses and training. And interestingly, it's such a universal thing. One might say, really, why would you even include it? Isn't it self-explanatory? Believe me, it is not. Okay, and majority of the projects that I've seen, something always is done in a shoddy way. And then you're like, wait, you guys have been doing great here, but how come you left this piece? So another thing you should take a look, and just again, this is a universal thing. All work and product functionality, that's bullet 3, will be delivered in accordance with the local fire code and requirements of other authorities having jurisdiction. AHJ, don't worry about it. It's just normal lingo in the specifications. But primarily, it has to meet codes, building codes and fire code, right? Imagine a security improvement for a facility. Let's say it's a door lock that when you need to evacuate, stops you on your tracks and you can't open the door. Just think about that. Take yourself in that situation and just say to yourself what you would be thinking, what kind of thoughts would go through your mind when you're already scared, you're running for your life, you're trying to get out of the building, but the door is not going to budge because the hardware and the way the door has been installed and designed, it does not meet fire code, which means that you should be able to exit freely without any obstructions. Okay? This happened on numerous occasions, even in recent years, unfortunately. And so the reason why it happened is because, again, contractors that installed certain pieces of equipment, particularly door hardware in this case, did not understand local fire regulations. And it caused not a security failure, but it caused injuries and harm to people in the facility because of violations of the fire code. So another thing you should be aware of is that if you're so lucky that at the end of your project, you're going to be visited by a fire inspector, let's say it's a security improvement, but you're touching doors and they, let's say, have to be fire labeled or whatever, and the fire inspector is going to show up and they don't like something that's not installed up to code, guess what? They're going to say, okay, two ways this can go. I'm going to write you a ticket and you're going to have to pay a fine and I won't let you use this and I'm going to stop your project, or you're going to fix it. And so it's going to cost you extra to fix it, or depending on how you structure your contract. Without this phrase in the contract, the contractor may look to you and say, yeah, but you never asked me to meet code. So technically, I'm not supposed to do anything. So pay me more, or I'm not doing nothing. Do you want to get stuck in that situation? I'll stop here because the rest of the stuff is really meant for contractors to review. Now, if you feel like you want to do it, no problem. You can read the rest of the bullets. And here is where it's a good opportunity that if you don't understand some of the language, please engage with one of the security directors at CSI and just ask them to help you understand it. I'm available through CSI if necessary to help clarify some of these things. But the language is to hold the contractors accountable for the work that they're going to be providing to you in terms of quality, in terms of features and functionality. Okay, the first few bullets are tools for you to hold contractors to their word and to the standards that you would expect. And then the rest of the list is just a little bit more technical, but still goes out to contractors as far as the requirements are concerned.
In those second half that what you're explaining, the second half of these bullets, we want to have some of the specs of the most common hardware purchases from these grants, just so it's right there. Again, you should have the specs from your assessment. And again, it will come down to what the vendor can provide, what they're an authorized dealer for, what they work with. But this at least a high level bulleted spec level that we think you should have when you work with any of these, whether it's cameras or doors, a couple of these high level, highly purchased items. Before we jump to the next slide, Ilya, can we just zero in on the last bullet? And this is an important point that we added in, is that, right, I'm going to read it out. Contractor may propose alternative solutions to achieve required project objectives as long as these solutions equal or exceed client's requirements in quality and performance. Besides the fact that you cannot require a certain brand through this grant, you cannot require a certain brand. Obviously, there are banned products. It's a whole different story. But we usually don't recommend saying a specific brand you want, but you say we wanted to achieve these specs, right? Let's look at one of these here, right? Like a security grade class 1 UL rated locks, right? That's standard door lock, commercial door locking hardware. Anything less won't suffice. So if they can at least propose brands that achieve that or more, you're in a good place. So remember, at the same time, you're providing your RP to vendors to work within their world and their products, and they need to meet these requirements. So they might have a different solution or an alternative, especially because you have to, at the end of the day, balance it with your budget and your needs. So it was an important piece for you to realize that you might say, I want this, and they say, listen, this will meet those requirements or give you a good security upgrade to this degree. Maybe it is a little bit less, but they have, because of your budget, and they have to propose an alternative solution that achieves your goals, even if it's not exact. So we want to make sure that that's a line that you could provide. So I think the next slide, we dig into some of the high level things that Ilya was just talking about. And maybe we can just reiterate it. These were those bullets that Ilya spoke through, and we highlighted the first one, and it's bolded on our RFP document because it's that important. We see this time and again where 3 cameras, NVR, wiring, total price. And that's a failure. What cameras? What specs? All those pieces should go with it so that you can literally easily take it and copy it into a browser and search for what it is. And also, if they don't install it, that happens sometimes too, they're just going to unload what they have in the back of their truck because you didn't call them out on it. And technically, they said 3 cameras. It's 3 cameras, but it's a 5-year-old model or something. This says you said you were installing this brand and this spec. That is not that. Just working on our own projects, I see it happen where they don't, it just doesn't get to the finish line, even when they put it on paper. But this gives you that ability to go back and say, this is what we proposed and agreed on, and including warranty, super important. Because the reality is no job's going to be installed turnkey and they walk out with no issues. Don't crush your vendor about that. It's reality. Like any project, you remodeled your kitchen and there was follow-up. It's the reality of the world. But make sure that you're covered for that return in the adjustments that your project's going to need. And a couple of these Ilya already talked about, right? Local fire code. You should be provided product literature. It shouldn't just be the spec item. When they provide their quote, they should provide you some materials explaining this exact product that they're offering you. Training on those items. You and your team should know how to use it. How do we turn it on? How do we log in? How do we get recordings, etc.? Any other ones we want to re-drill in and reiterate, Ilya?
It's a responsibility of each of the grantees to know very clearly which products have not been banned by the US government. That's the last bullet. Okay. I can tell you a few horror stories that Dov and I have seen, and the rest of the security team, right? Arrive at the facility. The person that runs the facility tells us, oh yeah, we already put in 50 cameras. We need a couple of upgrades, but we have a very good video surveillance system. Where we ask one question, what is the brand? And they're like, Hikvision. Well, Hikvision is banned by the US government. And then we can see the eyes widening. And they're like, well, so what does this mean? We're like, got to replace it. You can't upgrade the system. The government won't pay money for a
grant
product.
money, to clarify.
Yeah,
you can't replace it through federal grant dollars.
You can't. Yeah, you can't upgrade it through federal grant money. So then it sets in. But they've already made their mistake. You see what I mean? So contractors are notorious for looking for loopholes. It's just that's how they maximize the profit that they make, right? So when they can sell to you something you never stipulated that it's a bad product, it's not on them. You didn't ask, okay? And again, don't assume anything is something that a simple phrase that's been adopted by majority of international specifications for big projects is because no, you as a contractor should not be so silly as to install a product that's banned by the government for a government grant project. You shouldn't be doing that. But this phrase alone helps avoid those mistakes and that friction.
Real quick, Ilya, before you mute yourself. The word as-built. Can you just describe that for us?
Imagine what we discussed in the EHP, where there's a set of photographs and you show where devices will go, right? So, like Dov was saying, the reality of any project is that where you wanted, let's say, a camera or a door lock in this particular location, but because of the optimization or the slightly different design of each and every product, it turns out to be slightly different and particularly located somewhere like, I don't know, a couple of inches to the left, or a different set of cables is run to it. It still works, but it's just a slightly different design, right? So the as-built are the final documents that explain and demonstrate on the floor plan where devices have been installed throughout your facility, depending on the project assigned, right? So the as-built documentation is very important for future reference, that if you aren't upgrading your systems from the current finished project, right? It's always going to be much easier if you have those documents that from the contractors, they prepare them to refer to them a year from now, 2-3 years from now, and then say, wait a second, last time the system was put in this way. This is the as-builts. This is the product literature that's part of the as-builts. This is what they produce to us. So that later on, we could say, okay, this is the last state after a project that we did. Now we can take it forward, right? You could replace some devices, you know where they are, you know where the cabling runs. So the as-builts provide those that level of detail.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I just want to reiterate, these webinars are recorded. They'll be posted on our website in a few days. This material is available. I already provided a link to the cover sheet. This RFP one pager is also available, making some last tweaks, and your RSD will have it. So feel free to reach out to your RSD and say, hey, can we get this information? Next slide. I think we're gearing up towards the end. So far, I don't think any of this is too crazy. I think this is kind of where it hits the ground on what your bid should come in as.
We've always said that we're trying to simplify these things. However, one of the steps that we notice sometimes is that the facility and the team that is running the project does not really produce their own documents that need to be filled in with, let's say, unit pricing and so on by the contractors. It's okay, but each contractor has their own format. So even if, to Dov's point, you will get line item pricing, it might look different. The spreadsheet will be of different design, or maybe it's going to be in a Word document versus a spreadsheet. Don't know. So once you receive it back, it still looks a little bit out of alignment, if you will. So typically, if you possibly could, you should be using your own bid forms. So where the information needs to be filled in, so that all of that looks uniform when it's delivered back to you with the bid proposal. So we have some samples of these, some templates. We typically are careful to issue them to the community because first we want to understand the nature of the project, the complexity of the project, because these bid forms could be sometimes too complicated, you know. But please do reach out to the security directors, to Dov, myself, if you're looking to just review those templates and maybe simplify them. But basically, imagine a table that says, let's say, unit prices. And actually, we have a sample of it. Description of a unit, the quantity, total price, and so on and so forth. So a few metrics around each unit that's being sold to you, right? You want to control the format in which that's sent back to you so that it's easier to review, one apples to apples. Like I said, sometimes formats differ and sometimes it's challenging to tell what you're looking at.
I was saying, as we navigate the process, we hope to be able to educate you a little further so that when you do see these quotes that aren't exactly the same, you at least can pull out the criteria you need. You know, if one comes to you as a bulk price and one comes to you without any specs and one comes to you, you know, in a whole different format, at least you say, hey, this is not acceptable. We need more info. This one, we need line item pricing. So you kind of know what you're looking for now through the homework to design your RFP. And to be honest, some of the bids, even if they're not great, it's a bid. It suffices for your 3-bid requirement per project. And you say, hey, we're not going to work with a company like this that's trying to sneak. Maybe they're just trying to be quick. And they're not always nefarious. But to me, if I don't get those specific specifications in the light item, I mean, that's a non-starter.
And that's a very good point, though, because look, how many times have we heard from our clients when they say, well, they actually produced terrible documentation. So what do I do? Like I have 3 bids, one of them is terrible. So I can't level them. We're like, no, you can level. You just disqualify one of them. Right. So if you don't like the bid that you received, dump them. Just say, sorry guys, next time, whatever, we don't like it. Goodbye. Okay. Right. You have all the justifications once you receive all the 3 bids. And if you see that one really looks so terrible that it's unworkable and you cannot even level it, fine. You've disqualified it and now you have the justification because look at it. It doesn't provide the information that the other 2 bidders provided. It's not as clear as the other 2. Sorry, this is our justification. So when an auditor, let's say from the government, asks you a year from then, well, how did you achieve your decision? We looked at that bid and it didn't provide all the information. Here's a sample. Here's what they sent. So, and this is why this list here, completeness, accuracy, and clarity, company information and experience, workmanship, and so on and so forth, you can look at this and make these your criteria, at least initial criteria for how you're gonna, what you're gonna expect from these bids that are coming in. Okay, so like I said, we'll give you a few examples in the next few slides. Dov, do you have anything else to say about this?
I think let's get through. I think the next slide is the matrix, or not yet. Let's go through this. Let's start getting to the end and we'll take a couple questions. But I want to leave it at, before we do, is we have more RFP sessions coming. This was kind of our opener.
Now is a little bit of an exercise for you all. Example 1 and example 2 pretty much are the same. right? So if I look at them, like I know it's pretty much the same. However, please compare the two, particularly in the section that says model plus model number plus features. Okay? And just think for yourself, which example looks better than the other? Which example provides more information than the other? The prices are the same, okay? The prices are slightly different, but yeah, pretty much, you got similar things going on, right? But what is it about one of the two examples that just like, yeah, but I don't have enough information to understand what you're selling to me, okay? And I see this a lot, okay? Without further ado, because we want to move on, look at example two for over here, right? What are they selling to you? They're selling something that has a code QNV-7082R. Do you know what it is? No idea. I'm not a camera dealer. I have no idea what this is. So you're not explaining to me what is it that you're trying to sell me. You're not even telling me what brand it is. Okay. So right off the bat, I stop, I mark it, and I say, I'm not even willing to look at it. Sorry. This is not enough information for me to make a smart choice. But if I look at example one for the same, right, it tells me the brand, it tells me the brand, the model number, it tells me what the resolution is, it tells me that it's handle resistant, and it gives me the product link. So I can go to that link and look at the product for myself if I want to. You see what I mean? This is the simplest thing to do, but a lot of contractors don't do this. Why? Because they make assumptions. They make assumptions that you know better. They make assumptions that, oh, yeah, a person who's soliciting this bid must know security, right? You should tell those vendors right up front, look, I'm not a security expert. Your bids have to be super clear, and as if you're trying to demonstrate information anew to a group of novices, okay? Be very descriptive and use simple language and use as much information as possible so that I can understand what I'm buying. Okay.
I'm gonna add in, Ilya.
Go ahead.
Sometimes the bids you get, even example two, it doesn't give you that information. It just says 3 cameras. Or maybe the brand in 3 cameras, but no codes or specs of what model it is. That's even, at least this is technically, it looks like a model number now because we're seeing those comparisons here. But note that many vendors don't even give you that. And I don't know if it's right. It could be like Ilya said, because they assume you know, or because this is just how they do business, and they're not providing all the information they can to be able to slip a few things through. I don't know what the objective is. There are good ones out there, other ones out there. This is the world we need to set ourselves up for to do the best project.
And there are a couple of more details here, but like I said, it's to me, typically the way I explain it to my clients is, look, if you have more details that can help you make a smart choice, that's the bid you want to go with. If the contractor took the time, the bidder took the time to give you that information, and you feel enabled that, hey, yeah, I understand what they're selling to me. That's great. That's something to compare all other bidders to.
Yeah, let's close out on this one. We'll go to Q&A on the next one. They can read the next slide.
Sure.
As we do Q&A, and next session will be there. But the bid scoring matrix, you are required by the grant rules to have some sort of method to evaluate your bids. This goes in your notes, that when these bids come in, and like we get with the RFP, hopefully you now have the tools to get something that you can now evaluate by committee to score them, and then therefore decide how you're going to pick your vendor. It doesn't always have to be lowest cost. Obviously, that's an easy explanation, but there could be other reasons. And this is an example CSI has created. Many of you have already had it. It's a simple Excel sheet. We've talked about it in previous CSI session, these webinars. We're not going to go into it today, but the goal is so now you get bids, so you can now fill out this information. We'll leave this slide up. We're not going to go through it just because of time. As I mentioned, we hope to have a couple of the following sessions on RFPs, right? We've covered so much content over Consultants Corner, both on hardware and the grant rules and doing the seal bid process. We're not getting into that today. And I think where a lot of people still struggle is this RFP. So we'll come back with some examples. Maybe we'll do a live session like we've done in the past with groups on EHP. We'll do it for RFP. So we have a couple ideas to bring this home and make it real for you. So we'll have more RFP sessions. That is our plan, short of a new grant application opening, and we might interject with a training on the grant. But our progression over the next, second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, we're going to talk RFPs for at least the next few sessions. This was kind of our overview to bring it home. A lot of you who are newer to it, or a lot of you who are struggling with it, we want to put this out before you. And I think it's all at a digestible cadence now. Just to go through a few questions. I think Seth's on and Bill's on, or Ilya, if anyone sees on the chat. If I missed something,
I can read them. I can read them if that's all right. And forgive us, I'm going to start from the bottom. It says, if sending out an RFP to 3 vendors and only 1 vendor replies, are we allowed to sign a contract with that vendor? Dov.
Great question. So really, no. The requirements of the grant, and we can't speak for Dishes or GCJS, but your contract requires 3 bids. So you will need to keep following up with vendors to get appropriate bids. You may be able to reach out to your rep and ask, say, listen, we're trying and trying. Here's the proof. Here's how many emails, and we only have 2 bids. They can maybe okay it, but that is your only move. If you don't have enough bids, and this is per project, not 3 bids for 1 for cameras, 1 for doors, 1 for guards. You need 3 for each project. We talked about this on previous sessions, so I don't want to spend too much time. The only caveat, the only way around it is if you ask your rep, hey, we don't have 3 bids for this specific project. What's our move? Can we move forward? But without that, you just assume you always need 3 bids per project.
So along with the cover letter, EHP pictures, specs, we include a 4th document of our bid form. I suppose, Roberta, who's asking the question, you just want to understand what the full set is. It really will depend on the project you're doing. I assume you're trying to do an electronic security project, but just my hunch. But if that's the case, right, still, it would be useful to include the cover letter, the EHP, of course, with the designated spots for where you want your equipment. Specs, I don't know, I don't think you have them, but if you have a fairly recent assessment from a threat and vulnerability assessment from CSI, there will be a lot of language that is useful. So the assessment in total can be included. And if you've developed your own bid forms, yes, of course, please do include them so that you can collect information, especially on unit prices and the equipment descriptions and so on, in the format that you want.
This is our suggestion. This is how we think you can do, because we've seen the elaborate $1 million RFPs to what our real projects for CSI type organizations are. This is our suggestion for you to do a complete package using mostly what you have already with some content we have developed without drowning you. It could be more, it could be less. You can make a bulleted sheet. The DHSES and DCJS folk don't know security. They know paperwork. So if they just want to see, okay, you have your ad, check. You have an RFP, it's a bulleted form, technically check. But does it set you up well enough to do a good project? So that's that balance that Ilya and I were always talking about. How do we make this and really assist you in this very gray area, because there is no state guidance on what an RFP should include. How we think from our experience is the best way to do it without drowning yourself. And that's what we propose. So it doesn't have to be anything. The state wants you to have something. It could be less, it could be more, but this is what we think is our advised package.
Okay, next one. How do you protect against relabeling of banned products? Things to look for. No newspaper reported that recently a vendor was arrested for this. Well, that was a few years ago, and yes, you're absolutely correct. There was a vendor actually on Long Island, if I recall, that was relabeling products, and some embassies around the world, to their embarrassment, US embassies had to pull those products from their walls. Yes, it did happen. The best way to protect yourself is to do your research, and there actually that answers the question: how do you find a list of products banned by the U.S. government? And Dov, I think either we posted it before. If not, then reach out to your RSM and they'll send it to you. So CSI is at your disposal, by the way. And if that information is not on the website, just reach out to your RSM; they'll get it to you.
And if you have an
But
assessment
basic,
from us, it's in the
yeah,
assessment,
if you
the
have an
band stuff.
assessment for us, the link is in the assessment. That's perfect.
And I'm
And
sure your contract work, and I'm sure your NSGP reps and materials, that's the best source, is always through your dishes,
yeah,
your rep. And I'm sure with the PowerPoint materials they've sent you, they list what those banned products are. We don't make it up. We take it from the source. Most of what we provide in this webinar is from the source. So that's your
and by the
best move
way,
always.
we did include, if you recall, that list of requirements to bidders. That does include a statement about that the bid will not include any products banned by the U.S. government. So you're basically putting it back on the bidders to check for that. Another way you could do that is to request letters of certification from the bidders that no, none of the products we've provided to you are banned by the U.S. government. Letters of certifications is a very, very good tool. I've used it multiple times. And the vendor will be like, well, what, don't you trust me? I'm like, it's not about me trusting you. I'll forget about what you did a year from now. Okay, so I want that documentation on file. So later on, if somebody is auditing me, I can show them, no, actually, it's not my mistake. I checked and double checked. Go to the vendor. They probably made a mistake. Okay, so ask for those letters of certification. Next one, can we get a copy of this presentation to use your language? This is recorded. Yes, we can get a copy. It's going to be posted on the website. And then I think these two, okay, so another question here. Do you have a real RFP to show us?
I think this pretty much did show a real RFP package. I think right, we showed some examples. I think in future sessions we'll include what an RFP should look like. The reality is RFPs in the larger security world are much more comprehensive and deep. So we hesitate throwing that up on the screen versus showing you what you already have in hand to make a full package. But we're always evolving and we're always trying to design the best information for the group here.
Another one, can you create a blanket RFP to be sent out to multiple vendors, even if you know they may not be able to provide all the services outlined in the approved grant money?
We see this question a lot. Well, I'm putting out for doors and cameras. The camera company doesn't do doors. Door camera company doesn't do cameras. Yeah, you're splitting hairs. Do you want to put it all in one? Hey, bid on what's appropriate to you, or do you want to separate it? End of the day, that the cover letter deadline. You'll have different deadlines, so you just have to think what's appropriate for putting it out there. There's nothing inherently wrong from a grant perspective for putting it all together, but doors are going to take much longer than cameras. So you might not want to trip it up when you're making deadlines, which ideally are not arbitrary. So you might just want to. It's probably best to do it per project. But at the same time, you can make a huge package and say bid on what's appropriate to you. It's really either way.
I have a few more questions here, Dov. Do you want to go through them or we stop?
I see one more which I wanted to get into, which I think is a critical question, and I think from there we'll jump. But how do we know? I'm going to summarize it. We can all see it in the chat. How do we decide where things should be installed and how they should be done? We're not security experts, right? This is the question. That's a tough yin and yang here, always, right? From the time you applied for the grant to the time if you have a federal one, you make your EHP, right? For example, where should camera placement be? And we get that concern. It is the reality. How do we do it right? So that's why in our assessments we provide some specs. So at least the components of what you're installing is done to what we think are the appropriate standards. But then work with your RSD, think through it a little bit. I think even for camera placement, if you decide on what are the goals are not to slap up cameras. The goals are something. What? Cover entry points, cover perimeter. Then you have a vendor come in and say how they can best do it with their equipment, right? They're still quote unquote the experts. They should be able to tell you how they can design a system that will achieve your goal. So maybe it won't be exactly the same amount of cameras. One company might have a 360-degree camera, probably very expensive. And one company might say, well, we're going to use two cameras to just continuously point both directions. So that's something you'll have to look for, but if they can achieve your goals. On top of that, you have your RSD, you have hopefully some assessments from us, but it is, that's why we're here. We want to be that partner to you to help you. We can't plot and dot per se, but we can help you coach your committee so when you do design how you want to do your installation.
If we haven't gotten to your questions or some of the comments, I see some folks are posting some useful information here. Please do take note, everybody who's still with us, the chat, and see what the information may be helpful to you. I think that's about it. The only thing is, Roberta, I know that to some members of the community, slide decks are better, like even if it's a digital file, but you have it available. We've chosen YouTube and the website postings as a medium to communicate and leave this library for the community to use. I don't know what capacity we have to share individually prepared files with the community. So on YouTube, you could stop and take screenshots of everything you see. You can pretty much, if you're technically savvy, you can download each video if you wanted to. So that's the medium we've chosen. If you have any particular questions that some of our information which we've recorded today or before may be useful for your certain questions that your community has and so on, please reach out to the RSD and we'll see what we can do.
I'll close on this. When we just provide materials to the community, at the end of the day, we're not expecting anyone to be an expert, but there is a little bit of thinking and editing and navigating. And sometimes we put some language out and it could get misconstrued or not used correctly. Every one of these documents, and by the way, your RSD can provide you a link, not to this slide deck per se, but to the materials we've discussed to a degree, but they all require editing. You need to adjust them to your location. So for us to blindly post it and share it has actually caused more agita to organizations like yourselves than being a little bit more tepid and careful and giving you guys the fuel for thought to do a little bit of that energy into designing a good program. With that, we'll close it up. We definitely love sticking around, but we're not really going too far. Email your RSDs, we're always available. We'll continue on the RFP topics. So if you have some specific questions you want covered, please email us or your RSD to contact us, and we'll keep going. The game's, it's always a moving target, and it's a step-by-step process. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Ilya, Bill, behind the scenes. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.